This lesson will teach you how to implement a basic interactive music system with Fmod and Unity. Sounds like this. So let's take a closer look and listen at what's going on there. Let me play this again and break it down a little further. It starts with this section that we'll call an intro. It's just going to play this phrase over and over again until the player is ready to start the game. When the player drives the car forward, we'll hear a transition and then go into the main part of the music, known as the loop. So we're in the loop now, and as we play through the loop and smash into these crates, we hear these little melodic gestures that play over the top. And after we've hit all of the crates, we get to this last section. It's known as the tag. So this basic idea of intro, loop, and tag are known as musical building blocks. It's an idea that Chance Thomas discusses in his book, Composing Music for Games. It's a basic implementation, and of course, there's a lot more that can be done in game audio, but this idea provides a really solid foundation for understanding some of the more advanced concepts, and in this lesson, it will also show you how you can implement some of those things in Fmod that will allow you to grow and develop more sophisticated implementations in the future. So let's start with this basic lesson right now. All right, our work begins in Fmod. I'm starting here with a blank project. I've imported some audio and I'm ready to get going creating the events that we need for this implementation. The first thing I'm going to do is create a new event. So I'm going to make a new 2D timeline and I'm going to call this game music, capital G, capital M. And because I'm working with music, I want my timeline to use bars and beats rather than seconds, so I'll just change that right here. And I also know that, we'll get to that part later. Let's just go ahead and put some of this audio in here. So as you know, we're working with three different sections. We have the intro, then the loop, and then lastly the tag. All right, so get those three things lined up, and I can close the audio bin now. So let's listen to these one more time. The first section we'll hear is the intro. Intro is just one bar right here, but that's enough. We can use Fmod to loop that and allow it to continue for as long as it needs to until the player decides that they're ready to go forward and they initiate, in our case, driving. After the intro, we'll then hear the loop. And this is just a simple bass phrase that I put together with a little bit of percussion and some synthesizers. And then lastly, the tag. So the loop I composed with some phrasing that's a little off-kilter so that the repetition of the loop isn't as obvious as some loops can be. You can make your loop in whatever way you need to, whether it's for this lesson, you just need to throw something together quickly, or you're actually working on a game and you want to make sure that that loop fits the kinds of interaction and the style and the world and all the things that you're trying to match in that actual game project. And then lastly, we have the tag. The thing about the tag that's important is that it starts in a way that's really kind of bold and obvious, because in this implementation, once all of the crates have been smashed, we'll drop the loop out and allow that tag to come in and just completely steal the show and bring this piece of music out to a close. So you'll hear, and we can listen to it again from the beginning, this tag starts with run down a series of notes. It starts and it's pretty loud, but gets out of the way quickly and slowly decays over time. And something like that works well to create the kind of transition that we need. So now that you have an idea of what we're working with and what sort of raw material will work well for your implementation, we can actually start to throw this together. So let's see, some housekeeping things. I want to right-click up here in this area that Fmod calls the logic tracks, and I'm going to add a tempo marker. Now, I created this music at 120 beats per minute, which just happens to be the default here in Fmod, so I don't need to change that. But to match your tempo or time signature, you can just simply right-click after you've created that tempo marker, change the tempo, change the time signature, and it will do exactly what you need to do. And it's important to do that because the values that are set here determine the grid that shows up here. And that is really helpful because when you drag things around, they will snap to individual bars or subdivisions of the bar, well, beats and subdivisions, and that is really helpful for editing music and making sure that all of our transitions are smooth and align in terms of the tempo and rhythm of our music. So getting that in place is really important. Now that we have that in place, we can think about some of the things that we need for our game. We know that none of this music is really going to start until the player starts to driving. At least we're not going to get into this loop section. So let's go up to the Create menu and let's add a parameter. We want this parameter to be user discrete, which means that it will give us integers rather than floating point numbers. I am going to call this, let's see, what are we doing? Oh, let's just call it driving. And we'll allow the values to be either 0 or 1. We are driving 1 or not driving 0. It's just a basic Boolean. And with that parameter in place, we are now ready to create some logic and direct the playback on this timeline. The first thing we'll do is just right-click up here in the logic track. It doesn't matter where you click, and we are going to add a transition. And right now, we have a transition. It's just pointing off to the right, but we haven't selected a destination. Well, with that highlighted, we can come down here and we don't have a destination. Well, because we haven't added one yet. So let's do that. We can right-click here and add a destination marker. Default is marker A, but if we drag that down and to the left, we can put it here at the very beginning and then double-click and we can rename that start. And now that we have that in place, we can change this marker. We can right-click and say, set the destination to start, and it will flip that arrow around, or you can just simply change it down here. But what we want to make sure is that not only will it go to start, but it will go to start when certain conditions are met. We want to do this because we want this marker, and I cannot get this bugger to move right now. Geez, why is that thing just completely locked in right now? Weird. Huh. Well, let's keep working on this and see if maybe then I can get it to move. We need to give it some conditions. So we choose the parameter condition driving, and if driving is 0, so we can just change this ribbon slider right here, we want it to jump back to the start. Yeah, and this thing just will not budge for whatever reason. That's annoying. Well, let's just delete it, and let's try this again. I'm going to zoom in a bit, and I'm going to put my transition to start. I can do it that way this time. Drag it and put it right there. I want it to be there, so this green line is right here at the beginning of bar 2, the end of this opening loop. And then, with that highlighted, I can say that driving is the condition, and we want driving to be 0. There we go. So now, play this back, and driving is 0. It creates this little loop, and this marker sends it back until we change the parameter and we make driving 1. And then it allows playback to just go ahead and do exactly what we need it to do, which is fantastic. All right, so now that that's in place, we can continue to build out this event with some more logic and sequence the rest of these bits of music that we have here. Let's see, the first thing I want to do, well, we know that we need the loop to actually be a loop. So if I right-click in this blue header area, we get this option for new loop region. And it's important to click in that area so that you see that option, and so that when the loop region goes in there, it actually fits the duration of this loop and you don't have to resize it, which can save you a little bit of time. And what this means is that once we start to play this, we hear our intro, our game parameter updates, and driving is now true. And this brings us into our loop, and with that loop region, it will just continue to repeat within the bounds of this blue loop region. And it will do that until some force within this music system says you need to jump out of that loop and go and play the tag. Well, because that could happen really at any point, one of the easiest ways to do this is to create what's called a transition region. So we can right-click and choose Add Transition Region. This one can be resized so that the playback needle makes contact with it at all times and can check the condition that's there. And what we want to know, given our gameplay, is whether or not the player has smashed into all of the crates. And if they haven't, we want to keep playing the loop. If they have, then we want it to go on and play the tag. So we need another game parameter that can register that. So let's see, lots of different ways to do this. Let's look at one we haven't seen so far. We can come down here to our transition region conditions. We're going to add a parameter condition, but we don't have any sort of parameter for whether or not we've smashed into all the crates. So I can choose Browse and then click this button for New Parameter. This one will be user discrete again, and we are going to call this one Obstacles Hit. And let's keep our format. Actually, let's just call this one Obstacles, lowercase, so it's consistent with driving in terms of its formatting. Yeah, lowercase Obstacles, click OK. And we now have, oops, and I forgot to change the value of that. Let's see, Obstacles is over here. I can right click and choose Edit Parameter, and it's supposed to be 0 to 1, not 0 to 10. So it's going to function like a Boolean just as well. We either have 1 or have not 0 hit all the obstacles. And when you do this, Fmod asks if you want to scale. We don't need to scale this, but scaling will just simply reshape things, especially helpful if you're working on a parameter timeline. And it makes that change position of automation and things like that if the values of your parameter range change. But we have that in place, and we know that if all of the obstacles have in fact been collected, so we can change that value to 1. All right, that defaulted to 2 for a second, but it says 1 now that I tweaked it. if we have collected all of the obstacles and that parameter is equal to 1, then we need to go to a destination. Well, we don't have a destination for this, so we need to add one again. I'll right-click, I'll choose a destination marker, and we'll rename this one End. And so our transition will go to the destination marker labeled End. And I'll drag the tag audio back so it's lining up with that, and we'll play as soon as we jump to that transition marker. Well, at this point, we have everything in place. So let me restart this with all of our parameters zeroed out. We're here in our loop. Resize this so we can see some of this logic a little bit more clearly. And let's assume our player has decided to start driving. We go forward, and we're in the loop, and it will continue to play and repeat for as long as the player is working to hit all the obstacles. As soon as they do, that game parameter will update and become 1, and we jump to the tag. Alright, so that's great. Everything's working exactly the way that we want it to. It just doesn't sound as smooth as it could because we haven't really done much at this point to introduce some additional transitions that can make the switching from one bit of audio to the next more clear. And so we're going to do that. First thing is I want to make sure that I have a smooth transition when we go from the intro over here to our loop. So to do that, I want this audio to extend and have a crossfade between these two. So I'm going to bring this down, not onto the master. Let's see, maybe it'll be easier if I just drag that over. Yeah, if I drag that over, drag this, it always gets a little wonky doing this. There we go. Okay. Yeah, just kind of force it, drag it around, force it to go where you need it to go. Dragging it down and to the left actually made it work easiest for me. And now that I have this, we can see the crossfade, but it's not in the right place. I want the crossfade to happen here in bar 2 when we start to play the loop and we're in this loop region. So I need to extend this audio. But you can see, and let me zoom in so it's a little bit more clear, we just have this null space because this audio file is only a bar long at 120 beats per minute. I need to fix that by switching on the loop option that's here. That repeats that, and that will allow that to go on. And then I can bring this back, and I think just 1 beat should be sufficient. Bring this over to the left, so we should now have 1 beat's worth of crossfade between these two. And let's hear that. Okay, our loop still works as we need it to, and that makes sense. We start driving. And that transition may be a little longer than I wanted it to be, so I'll shorten that up a tiny bit. Let's hear that again. Oh, I know why it's not sounding the way I want it to. I think that my loop, this loop got, the beginning of it was chopped off somehow. The process of moving all those sound files around. Okay, let's try this one more time. There we go. That sounds better. And it may be that the transition of this length would have been fine to begin with anyway. Yeah, be careful when you're moving your audio instruments around and don't inadvertently trim from the beginning like I just did. That was not good. Okay, well now that that's fixed, I think we're in good shape and we have this loop and that's going to play well. But we know that we have kind of a crazy transition over here to, yeah, crazy transition where it just jumps kind of out of nowhere and goes into this tag. Oh, and there's something else that's going to sound kind of weird. Here, let me yeah, I should be able to play it back from here, reset our values where they would be at this point. So listen to this. Yeah, there we go. Because we loop and we are coming back here, that little 1 beat's worth of audio from our intro works its way into this loop. And that probably sounds worse than having kind of a goofy transition into our tag. So we need to actually fix both of those things. Let's start by remedying what's here. That one's a little, well, they're both pretty easy, but we'll start there because it'll be easier to move things around that way. So I'm going to shift my audio just over to the side and get it out of the way. And then I'm going to take this sound file, copy, paste it in here, get rid of the fade, take this transition region. I don't want the fade. Move the transition region here and move the loop region there. So what this means is that Fmod will play. It will continue to loop in this area for as long as driving is 0. As soon as driving is 1, it proceeds. It plays across this crossfade, so we have a nice smooth transition there, and then continues to play until it gets here into this loop region, and then it will allow that loop to cycle through and do its thing there before moving on and jumping to end. Well, as you can see, if we start to move these things around, our timeline gets a little bit longer. And one thing that I like to do is to try to, if possible, keep things short so that you can see it all within a single window and not have to do a lot of scrolling back and forth. And one way we can do that here is to just take this loop and condense it into a much smaller loop region. The way we do that is this. We'll first, take our loop region, and let's say we're just going to make it 1 bar long. We'll use keep the transition region to match that size, and then we'll also change the length of this instrument. Now, if we pull, whoops, oh, we don't want obstacles to equal 1, we want it to equal 0. Now, if we let it loop like this, we're literally getting the same thing over and over. It's not playing through the full phrase of the loop. And the reason why is because our loop region says jump back to the beginning. When it does that, it starts this audio over again. And so we're literally just hearing the first bar of this loop. If we want to hear the whole thing, we need to toggle 2 buttons on. In our instrument, we toggle on the loop so that it will repeat, and we toggle on the async. And what that means, let's zoom in so we can see it more clearly, is that Fmod is playing 2 timelines simultaneously. We have this loop region that's looping the audio in our event, but then because this instrument is asynchronous, its 6 bars of a loop are continuing to play and cycle through, but you can see how it's kind of running on its own independent timeline by watching that white playback needle there. And that's one of the beauties of having asynchronous, is that you can have something take up a smaller chunk of space like this, but it's still going to be able to loop and do everything that it needs to. Well, now that that's in place, we can move these things back. So we put our end marker there, we put our tag there, change our scale so we can see everything. That works well. Kind of like keeping similar things in the same row. Just makes it a little easier to read, especially when things get more complicated. And this is going to work well, except we don't have our transition. You know, we know that we want to be in this loop and jump out to the tag, but not have it be so abrupt. And look at that asynchronous. It just continues to play when we jump out into the tag. That's definitely not going to work well. So let's remedy that. This is pretty simple. We can bring the bring the tag down here. I'm going to extend the length of the loop, and then I'm going to bring the tag over there. So essentially what I've done is created a 1-bar fade between the loop and the tag, but I don't want it to be quite like this. As you know from our discussion of the tag earlier, one of its features is the fact that it starts kind of suddenly, so I don't want that to fade in at all. Because that's the case, I want this loop to fade out pretty quickly, so I'm going to change the shape of the loop to be more concave like this. What that means is that when I collect all of my obstacles, and it just jumps out of the way immediately, and it allows that tag to be heard very clearly. So it sounds a whole lot better. Still a little abrupt though. And part of the reason why is right now when we change this game parameter, this transition will just fire immediately. But we can tell Fmod to do that in a way that sounds a little bit more musical. All of these transitions have quantization intervals, and so you can tell it to make that transition after a certain number of bars have passed, or at the next beat or subdivision. And you can try different values here. You know, certain values will work better depending upon what you've composed. I know for this music, 1 bar actually works well. And so to give you an idea of how that works, let me reset obstacles to 0, play this. I'm gonna put a number 1 in there, but not hit enter yet. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so I actually changed the parameter value on beat 2, I think, and it waited until it got to beat 3 before it jumped. Or if I changed it on beat 3, it waited till it got to the end of the bar and jumped right there. Let's listen to that again. So we're in the loop. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to change it on the first beat of the measure. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so it went ahead and played the rest of that bar before it created the transition. It put that tag right on the downbeat, and that sounded exactly the way that I wanted it to. So I think we're in good shape for this event, which is fantastic. I'm going to save my work. And then there's one more event that we need to create, and that's the event that does the melodic gesture that we heard. Every time you smash into a crate, you get this little kind of ethereal note that plays that adds something akin to a melody on top of the bass groove that's playing in this bit of the music. So I'm going to right-click, create a new event. This will be a new 2D timeline, and I am going to call this Obstacle Impacts. Did I spell impacts correctly? Yes, I did. Fantastic. All right. And then this is going to have a collection of notes. And if I select all of these here in my audio bin, drag them and drop them onto the timeline of this new event, Fmod is great. It automatically creates a multi-instrument, which is exactly what I want. Every time an obstacle impact happens, I want it to play one of these notes. And multi-instruments just do that by default. There's not much that we need to do to this. One thing you might want to consider is the playlist mode. Shuffle ensures that they will be randomized with no repeats, but if you'd like the option of a repeat, you can actually change it to randomize, and then there's a chance that you will get some of the same notes that play back to back. It's entirely up to you, but one result may be better than another. You can also play around with the probabilities that are here, and once you start to do that, especially if you're working with something like this, it kind of puts you into a position where you can kind of start to dictate a melody, thinking about will there or will there not be repetitions, what is the likelihood that different pitches will play, and there's a lot that you can do here to create something that might sound a little bit more intentional. But I'll leave it there for now. It's just fine as is. Now that both of those things are done, I need to get it ready to go into Unity, which means I need to right-click and assign this to the master bank. Do that for both of these. And then now that both of those have a bank, we save it, file save, and then file build. Let it generate all the data that Unity needs, and we're done. So we can take this Fmod session, move it over to Unity, and finish the implementation. All right, we're back in Unity, and I am starting this implementation with a blank version of this driving tutorial that I've been working with in this series. If you are new to these lessons, you'll need to go back to the first video to get the details on where this lesson comes from and how to get things set up and running. I'm going to go through it really quickly right now, but you'll want to see the full first video in order to get up to speed with all of those things. In this blank template, I've made a couple changes, like I put the camera inside the vehicle, which just makes things look a little bit better, and it's easier to track where you are in the world. But I don't have Fmod in here right now, so I'm going to go to Edit. Under Assets, Import Package, Custom Package. I'm going to find my Fmod Unity integration package. That shows up in a window like this. Click on Import, and Unity grabs all those Fmod assets from the package I downloaded and copies them into this project, which is super helpful. When that's done, we'll get an error down here that says the project must be set to an FS profile. Yes, we haven't determined which Fmod project we're going to integrate, but we do have this Fmod menu up here, so I can choose Edit Settings. I get this option, and I can choose a project path. I'll click on Browse. I find the project that I was working with earlier, click on Open. That's now associated with my project. The other thing is that if I go up here and choose the event browser, I get this little interface widget, which I will dock here and open up events, and there is my game music. And we've got all of the parameters that we defined earlier. Loop, intro, loop, and our tag. Great, so everything is there and behaves exactly the way that we would expect it to. So that is in good shape. Let's see, what else do I need to do to get this ready to go? Oh yeah, Fmod is here, but I need to make sure that we have an Fmod Listener. I am going to attach that listener here to the main camera. Add component, Fmod Studio Listener. Actually, I think originally that listener might have been attached to, oh yeah, it was probably on the main camera. I've deleted the Unity default listener that was in this, that's for sure. Because we certainly don't need that now that we're doing all of our audio with Fmod. But that listener is in there, and I believe that is everything to get this project up and running. So now we can start to do some specific work. Let's begin with the music. I'm going to make these things a little smaller so we can see more of what's in here. Player controller script is fine, but here, this is inspector for my vehicle, and I'm going to add an FMOD component. I want to add a studio event emitter. I want this to play when the object starts, and I want it to play my game music event. And so that will allow this music to play right away when everything gets up and running in Unity. We'll test that and make sure it works like we expect. Yep, that's good. And we can drive and crash into stuff, but it's not really what we want yet. I want to reduce my speed. 20 is a little too fast. I'm going to bump that down by half and drive this truck a little slower. It doesn't look like a fast truck anyway. Well, now that I have that in place, I'm ready to actually do the implementation, but everything at this point that moves the music forward has to happen in code. And so I am going to find my player controller script over here in project. Actually, it'd just be easier to find it here in the hierarchy. Yeah, here's the player controller script. Open this up, choose edit script, and it's going to open it here in Visual Studio. Fantastic. All right, pretty basic. Just has the bare bones of what we need to move the truck around, but we're going to add some things that get this working fully. First couple things I'm going to add are here in the class definition, and I'm copying and pasting from another file, so I'll make sure to slow this process down and make things large enough so that it's easy for all of you who are following this video to see them. All right, so that gives me everything. I want to get rid of the start function because we're not going to use the start function here. Okay, yeah, that's everything. So let's look at this chunk of code that I just put in. First, note that this is in the class definition. So it's right here under public class player controller monobehavior. The first thing we have is a public variable. It's an integer, and it's count. This is something that we're going to need to tally the number of crates that we hit, because once we've hit all the crates, we want the tag section of the music to kick in. So we need to track that value somewhere. This next line creates a Boolean variable. Has the player started driving? Yes or no? As you know, that's one of the important things that we track with a game parameter, and this, well, we're not using it directly that way here, but we do need to know when we've actually started playing so we don't get any false starts with our game audio. This variable will help with that. Then this next line, we just simply want to make sure that we are referencing our studio emitter. So I've done that with the name game music. And then once we have a reference for that, we use the awake function. So private void awake, and we take that reference for game music and actually retrieve the event emitter that's attached to this game object. And you'll see where that comes back later on when we need to refer to or make changes to the game parameters that are attached to that event emitter. Now that those things are in place, we can continue to make some changes in this script. Let me scroll a bit, and this is this next block I'm going to copy and paste is all part of the update function. So I copy that. I'm here in update, create some space, paste that in. Everything looks good, no errors, no weird formatting, fantastic. All right, well, note that the block that I just pasted is in an if statement. And this is where that started variable that I created earlier comes into play. If we haven't started playing, then these events will be allowed to happen. But if we have started playing and we're driving, then we no longer want to execute that. The reason why is we test to see if the player has pressed a key to start driving. And we want to make sure that they have actually started driving. We don't want any of this to fire until we know that they're moving. We set that variable to be true so that we can't step back in here and do this. And the reason why we want to is because in this block of code, we actually set our driving game parameter to be the value 1. So we use game music, we access the Fmod emitter that we retrieved a few lines before. We know that there's a parameter named driving that's in that emitter, and we want to set the value of driving to be 1. This is what takes us out of our loop, which is going to play by default, and takes us out of the intro, which plays by default, and puts us into the loop that will allow that section of the music to play continuously. And the reason why we want to make sure that that doesn't happen again is if someone's smashing into crates and they stop and then they start driving again, we don't want to re-trigger this. We don't want this to be playing more than once or to have any conflicts. And so we just simply make all of this code unavailable once the player has started driving, because musically speaking, they'll be listening to the loop. We don't need any of those changes to happen anyway. Now that that is done, we should be able to run this. So let me save and switch back to Unity. There we go. Looks like the script compiled and is just fine. That's fantastic. Yeah, all that looks good. And so let's hear this. All right, we're here in the intro. I'm going to start driving, and let's hope we get into our loop. Yes. Excellent. And we're into our loop. That's fantastic. And as I was doing this, I realized our code checks for both forward and horizontal input, but technically horizontal input is going to be turning, and we don't want this to trigger if we're turning. So I am just going to do a comment like that and take horizontal input and that comparison or operator out of that, because we really don't want to track horizontal input at all. We just want to track forward input. All right, let's double check and make sure I've done that correctly. Yeah, good. And if we turn, excellent. That is exactly what I wanted to have happen. Great. Okay, that is working and doing precisely what we need. Now, in order to get from the loop to our tag, we need to know how we're doing with regard to smashing into boxes. And in order to test that, we actually need to make some changes here to the obstacles. So I can just select all of these, and then we need to add a box collider to this so that we can use this isTrigger property of the box collider. That will allow Fmod to respond when a trigger is hit. And then the other thing that we're going to do to help with that is give all of these things a tag. Now right now you can see that they're all untagged, but I am going to click on add a tag and then click this little plus, and I'm going to use a capital O obstacle. That is the name of the tag that I want to use. Then back here to our vehicle. Actually, we don't need to do anything there. We know that these have the box collider, isTrigger is checked for all of them, and they're all tagged. Oh, I created the tag, but I didn't apply it. I'm glad I checked that. There. With all of them selected, I choose obstacle, and now, yes, they are all tagged with obstacle. Essential step. Almost missed it. Good. And now that that is in place, I can switch back to Visual Studio, and I'm going to grab another chunk of code. And then let's drop this in. Now this is going to be a new function altogether. So I find the end of my update function, create a little space, and then paste. And here we have a new onTriggerEnter function. And the comments of this code should make it pretty clear what's happening. When we run into one of those box colliders that we just created, this function is going to fire, and we check in this if statement to see if the tag of the object that we hit is named obstacle. Notice that that name is exactly the way that I named the tag that we just created back in Unity, capital O obstacle. And if we hit an obstacle, then count plus plus will just simply increment the value of count. Count was initialized to be 0 at the top of the script. Every time we hit an obstacle, we add 1 to that. And then in the lines below that, we do some additional comparison. When we've hit all 5 crates, and if you have more than 5 in yours, you will need to change this number, but we look to see if the value of count is equal to 5, and if it is, then we use a similar line, access our emitter that we saved under the name game music, and we set the obstacles game parameter to 1. And let me just double check back here in Fmod. Yes, obstacles is spelled with a lowercase o. So that is all correct. Oh wait, I didn't want Unity, I want Visual Studio. And that should do it. So save the script, switch back to Unity. There we go. Make sure the script is happy, no errors. No errors, that's good. All right. And let's select our vehicle. Note that count, I made count a public variable so we could actually track it here. So as we go through, oh, I bumped that 1, so it actually hits 2. Oh, I was a little sloppy hitting those crates, and so the variable actually went up a lot higher. No big deal. It's fine. The important thing was that we made it to our tag, and we heard the tag, which was exactly what we wanted. That's great. But we have one more musical element to introduce, and and that is we need our whatchamacallit, we need to play the little melodic notes when we crash into this obstacle. And this, fortunately, is one of the easiest things to do. We can do that all right here in the inspector. We just simply click on Add a Component, type in Fmod so we get an event emitter. What event do we want to play? Well, we want to play that obstacle impact event that we created. That's the one that contains the multi-instrument object. And we want that to play on a trigger enter event. It's looking for a specific collision tag, and we know that we have obstacle. So now, every time we hit one of those crates, not only will it increment our count variable, but we'll hear one of those random notes that we put into this obstacle impacts event. So let's test that and see if it's doing what we want it to. There we go, there's one. That's definitely repeating notes. Excellent. That is doing precisely what I wanted it to. Great. There's one thing that bugs me, though, and that is I just want there to be something that's a little more smooth, a little more seamless at the beginning. So let's bounce back to Fmod and make a slight tweak and try to make the beginning when we start driving a little bit more smooth. So we're back in Fmod, and we're here to make one final tweak on this game music event. I wasn't thrilled with the beginning of the event, particularly when it transitions from the intro into the loop. And so I want to use a trick that's called a stinger and let that play in an effort to help smooth out this transition and make the passage from this loop to this loop a little easier. In the audio that I imported, actually I don't have the stinger in there, so I need to quickly import that there. The stinger is right there. Aha, there is the stinger. Fantastic. It sounds like this. So it's just this electronic swoosh that should blend well with these elements and create something else to help bridge the gap between these two things. Now, I could drag it and drop it and put it in a yeah, I need to get it into this, but I need another audio track. So let's name this one music, and I'm going to add another audio track, and I'm going to name this one Stinger. And I could drag this and drop this here, I suppose. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, yeah, I drag this and drop this, put the stinger there, close the audio, and let's hear how this sounds. It's a little too loud. I also think it goes on for a little too long. So what if I grab the beginning of this and just trim it a bit, drag that back, zoom in. Can I get, oh, that's right, if you hold down the command key, you can you won't be locked into bars and beats, which is helpful for some things, but not for something like this stinger that happens out of time. All right, let's back this volume down a bit. How's that? That works well. I'm going to audition it one more time just to be sure. And just to be extra safe, let's put a quick fade right there. And I'm going to, yeah, I think the volume's fine. Excellent. That works well. That does exactly what I need it to. So, hey, we've got a stinger in there. That's going to help smooth out this transition. And the other thing that's great about this is that because we put this audio loop here, but removed the loop region that was there originally, this will only play once and will be locked into our loop here in this area, so this is never going to come back and bother us. So we save it, F7 to build it, switch back to Unity. Unity's updated the cache, and now we can test this out. Okay, definitely some things to change. Why are these? These guys are really loud. Let's back that down a bit. And oh, that didn't sound good. Well, I think my screen recording software is getting grumpy about switching between applications. So we may have to just say it's good enough for now. These things sound fine here in Unity. Yeah, the level of that sounds better, but you know what? Yeah, that's what bothered me the first time. I couldn't quite place it. As soon as I hit the key and start driving, there's a little bit of latency. And I really want that stinger to happen right away. I want that stinger to hit as soon as I start driving. And that's just not going to happen because right now, the way that this transition is set up, FMOD won't allow playback to go beyond this point until I've hit the key and it plays through the rest of the bar and then it hits the stinger. I really want this stinger to happen instantly. And so what that means is I need to take it out of this timeline and I need to put it onto the parameter timeline. Because when it's in here, I can set it up so that that audio file plays when the stinger hits a value of 1. And then it will play right away and not be lined up with the beat at all. And I think that is going to sound much better overall. So let's try this again. Grab my stinger, drop it into the parameter timeline, and I can't edit this because with the integers that I've used here, maybe if I hold down the control key, nope, that doesn't do it either. Okay, well, there's another way to get at this. I'm going to create a new 2D timeline, and I'm going to call it Stinger. And I'm going to take my stinger and I'm going to drop it onto that timeline. And now that it's here, I can edit it any way I want to. So I can start nice and smooth. Oh yeah, and FMOD is freaking out because I've been switching between applications, so like I said, we'll just ignore that for now because I'm in the midst of recording this and I don't want to break up the lesson. So let's hope that this is good enough. You'll definitely get the idea with your own audio files, and you're not doing this while screen recording, so everything should sound fine for you. But now that I have this, I can come over here to game music. Oh, and the reason I did this is because I couldn't edit the beginning of the stinger in on the parameter timeline, and I knew that it was from my earlier version. I knew that the file was too long, so I put it in the separate event, did the editing that I need to here, and now what I can do is reference, and maybe I want to make that even a little bit shorter and really just allow this to swell. Oh yeah, that sounds awful. Now let's hope that this is decent. It will come up more quickly though, and I think that's ultimately going to be good, especially if I push that fade curve up like this and really allow it to just kind of pop out of nowhere. Maybe a little bit longer. Okay, so this stinger is now in its own event, and I've been able to edit this a lot. What that means is that I can then come back here to game music and grab that event and just drop that event here. And so now we have, bump the mic again, sorry. We have what's, what I would consider to be a nested event. And stinger event will play as soon as our parameter for driving hits a value of 1. Now I'm going to test this. It's going to sound awful because Fmod's freaking out, but you should at least be able to get a rough idea of what it is. And I'll watch what happens. As soon as I hit the enter key, stinger starts and it goes into our loop. Oof, and that is brutal, but we can test it in the game. I save, I build, I move back to Unity, and we should be able to hear it without any issues here. 3, 2, 1, drive. Yes, that's exactly what I wanted. Let's hear that again. So I'm just letting the intro play, and I decide, oh, I'm going to drive forward. And that allowed that stinger to play immediately. So I feel like, as a player, I get immediate feedback, and that lets me know that the game is responding to my wishes. The stinger creates that musical event. It precedes the transition from the intro to the loop, but it's doing it in a way that feels musically appropriate, and when we finally get to the end of the bar, when we go on into the loop, the stinger has really helped get us there. It's working really, really well. But changing it up in Fmod and making sure that it's triggered when the key is pressed, when this parameter changes, rather than locking it to the timeline is really what's essential for making that happen. So keep that in mind for your future game projects, and when you know that you need to have something that changes suddenly as soon as a parameter shifts, you can introduce those changes on the parameter timeline and then allow them to dovetail and blend with other musical elements that you have, tying everything together to create a more cohesive soundtrack.